It's YouTube Wednesday! This video is kind of an answer to a lot of the questions that I get. On my channel I do set design, I do costuming, I do puppet making, I do mask making, and I get a lot of questions on mask making. And I can say that I've done a video on every single aspect of mask making. And there are other videos out there. There's a lovely, like 2-hour-long series by Distortions on making latex masks. This is the conversation party version. I'm going to talk you through the whole process at one time in one video. Hopefully your attention span can bear it, and you can take 10 minutes to learn about the whole process, and I explain each step. So the first thing that you need to do to make a latex mask, and I'm talking about a latex half mask, because there's a lot of different types of masks and you can make this very complicated, but you don't have to. I always tell people to start by making a latex half mask. I just did a video on making, and this is a sculpting form, I just did a video on making a plaster bust. It's that guy right back there. You can make one of these the exact same way. Just cut the back end of your styrofoam head off and then plaster over that. So you can make this on your own. You don't have to buy it from me at stillpeacestudios.com, but you can if you want to. So once you have this, then you sculpt your mask on top of it. You can use oil-based clay or you can use water-based clay. What I normally use is water-based clay because it's nice and squishy. And I'm working in a shop. Water-based clay is dirt and water. It's water-based, all right? It's mud. And as it dries, it gets dust everywhere. If you're working in your kitchen, use monster clay, which is an oil-based clay. If you are working in your garage or a shed or something, then maybe go with water-based, because I think it's certainly a more forgiving material as far as sculpting goes. So there's water-based clay and there's oil-based clay. You have to make that choice. Mostly it's made for people by the amount of mess. So you do your sculpture on top of your head form. Don't let any of this be exposed, because you don't want any, if it's plaster, you don't want it to stick to the mold, all right? I have a whole video on plasters, and I have lots of videos on how to make a mold. But basically, once you have your sculpture done in clay, then you're going to paint over that and then form over that plaster. There are several kinds you can use. You can use US #1 pottery plaster. You can use Hydrocal. You can use Ultracal 30. Those are the only three I recommend. If you frickin' message me and say, I made a mold just like you said and it didn't work, and what kind of plaster did you use, and you answer mortar mix one more frickin' time, I'm not gonna help you. I can't help you. Those three, Ultracal 30, Hydrocal, US #1 pottery plaster. That's it. So when you make a mold over a half mask form like this, it's going to look something like this. Once that's made, all right, then you're going to have to remove the sculpting form from it. These guys have a handle on the back, but you might have to kind of pry it out with screwdrivers. You'll just have to get it out. That's engineering. You figure that out. I always make my molds a little bit flat so that I can pour them up. After you get the head form out, that's going to be full of clay because that's your sculpture. So the inside of your mold looks like your sculpture. You have made a highly decorative interior of a stone bucket. That's what you made. So this happens to be Mumra that I finished recently. And once your clay is out, all right, once your clay is cleaned out, I normally use a power washer to clean most of the clay out. I hand pick almost all the clay out, and then I clean it with a power washer. I don't like to do that with US #1 pottery plaster because you can mar it. The power washer will actually cut into the stone because that's a very soft stone. It's okay, you're not going to get as many pulls out of it because it's not as strong because of the process of erosion. So you now have this, and you want to make a mask out of your plaster mold. Then you fill this mold with latex. There are several methods. I'm telling you the one that I use. If you do it different than me, I can't help you when you have problems. Maybe I can, but I'm a lot less likely to. So I pour in a little bit of latex, casting latex, or mask making latex, not makeup, liquid latex. You don't want to use that. Mask making latex or casting latex. Pour in a little bit and paint in all the features. What you're trying to fight is air bubbles. You might have teeth that are real long and pointy. You're going to have to poke down into those teeth to make sure the latex gets all the way down in there, or else an air bubble could get stuck. Think of a glass in a glass in the sink when you're washing dishes, and you push it down to the bottom with the open end facing down, and there's still air in there, and you have to turn it on its side to get the air out. So that's another method. You might have air trapped in the tips of your ears that you have to tilt the mold a little bit and allow that air bubble to move up and out. You have to think about the negative space of your mold, where will the air get trapped, and work for that not to happen. There are some masks that I have to pour at an angle and then keep pouring and keep changing the angle in order to not trap air. That's something that you have to work through kind of on each sculpt. What kind of latex do I recommend? I get my latex from 3 places right now, all right? I get my latex from Bitty Mold Supply because they are close to me, they're local to me, and I don't pay any shipping. So I can drive there, I can pick it up, so that's latex that I like to use. In general, casting latex is casting latex. There are some differences. I have also lately been ordering from this company here, which is Black Lagoon Supply, and I order from Black Lagoon Supply on occasion. Their latex is thicker than Bitty Mold Supply's latex. It's very creamy. It's a thicker, creamier latex. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. It is a little harder to get it down in those really pointy teeth, in those big ear tips. It's a little tougher. But for my open molds, like a skull mold or something, this is actually a little faster because it's so thick, it leaves a thick coating, almost even with the pour in, pour out. The third place that I get latex from is Fright Props. Fright Props, they're out of St. Louis. So Bitty Mold Supply is in Texas, Fright Props is in St. Louis. I don't remember where Black Lagoon Supply Company is from, but I'll put it in the video. And when you pour up your mold, you pour it a little bit, you paint it in to make sure that you don't have any air bubbles, and then you pour it up the rest of the way, making sure you don't have any air bubbles, possibly tilting it, and you let it sit. The longer you let it sit, the thicker your mask is going to be. That's the control of thickness that you have. How masks happen is you have poured latex into the plaster mold. The plaster is thirsty. It is sucking the moisture out of the latex that is touching the mold. That's why you bothered to make the inside of the plaster bucket decorative in the way that you want it. It is sucking that moisture out. So then, when you allow it to go a certain amount of time, if it only sits for 10 minutes, it's only going to suck out so much moisture. If it sits for 2 hours, then it's going to suck out more moisture. I recommend a 2-hour dwell almost in every scenario. That's going to be a nice thick mask. If you want it thinner, go less. If you want it thicker than that, then you can leave it longer. At some point, there's a point of diminishing returns where there's only dry latex up against the plaster, so it's not going to get any more moisture out. I think that's about the 6 to 8 hour mark, but I haven't really tested that theory too much. Know this, US #1 pottery plaster, if you have a mold made out of that, and a mold made out of ultracal, and a mold made out of hydrocal, the pottery plaster will be the thickest in the same amount of time. The hydrocal will be in the middle, and the ultracal will be the thinnest mask. Even if you dwell for 2 hours at the same time, same temperature, same everything. Because the ultracal is more dense, so it's going to draw that water through slower. The US #1 pottery plaster is the most porous, so that water can move through it very fast. So those are the factors to consider when you are pouring up. At the end of your 2 hours, your timer goes off. Then you will very carefully pour out this latex. You will pour this latex out. This is a bowl full of latex. You'll pour it back into the 5-gallon bucket. You'll pour it back into the 5-gallon bucket. In here is very wet and very fragile. Don't touch that. Don't mess with that. Pour your latex back in. All right? Let it drain. Let it drain either on its end. I normally drain so that it all collects in the forehead and then pours out of the mold. If you're sitting it to drain like this, you're going to have a puddle in your forehead. If you drain from this way, your chin normally dips down a little bit. You're going to have a thick chin. So drain it either straight up and down and a little bit cocked forward, so it all comes out of the forehead. But then you have to watch your ears, because your ear tips often go up and it's going to pool somewhere. Drain it for about 10 minutes. You may have to tilt it a different way to drain something else for another 10 minutes. Latex moves slow, it's a thick liquid. So move it and let it drain again for 10 minutes. It's sitting on top of this bucket, it's draining into that bucket. Then, carefully, because this latex might stick to the bucket, you're going to be very careful when you pull it apart. You have a wet, gross, fragile mask in here. You have to let that set out. That is now going to dry or cure in the air, in the sun, whatever. Give it 12 hours. Here in Texas, with a fan on it, out in the Texas summer heat, I could pull a mask out of here in about 4 hours. If you are in Oregon, you will not be able to pull a mask out in 4 hours. You might have to wait 16. It all depends on your humidity, your temperature. Cold weather slows the process way down. So that's something to consider. But let's just say you waited 12 hours, there's a fan on it. This latex will be very white when it's wet. You come back and it's going to look yellow. That means it has kind of cured. It is darker than it was when it was wet. You cannot just pull this out of here. You have to get baby powder or cornstarch baby powder. I think Ed Edmonds at Distortions uses plaster dust because he has plaster around. And you can just, I use a 1-inch chip brush and one of these guys. This one has some stain on it, but a 1-inch wooden handled chip brush. And I brush that baby powder around inside of here because latex will stick to itself. If you don't do that, if you don't get that baby powder down into the ears and into those long teeth, then that latex could collapse and stick to itself and then that ear will look flat, deflated, and funky, and you don't want that. So once you have done that, then you're going to pull out the mask. Whatever way it's in there, you have to pull opposite. You got to pull the ears out this way. You got to pull the eyelids around. You have to be very careful. You don't want to break the stone. The rubber is strong enough to break the stone. The thicker the mask is, the more wear and tear it's going to put on the mold. Once you peel it out, then you have what we call a blank. This is a blank witch mask. You can see that there's some flashing on it. You can see that the eyes are not cut out and the mouth isn't cut out. You're going to cut off all the excess, and you're going to cut out your eye holes, your nose holes, your mouth holes. And the more you thought about that while you were sculpting, the easier that's going to be. I always delineate a nice hard line of exactly where I'm going to cut out those eyes. The mouth, I normally make it pretty clear where it needs to be cut out. Once you have it trimmed, then you're going to have a piece like this, which is your cut mask. This is my LED skull. These happen to be sockets for LEDs. Oh, I know that looks a little weird, but that's what this piece is. This is a trimmed mask, a trimmed blank. I haven't painted it yet. I haven't strapped it yet. I will use pop rivets, and I put 2 elastic straps on mine. 2 elastic straps that are 3/4 of an inch thick. And I cut those pieces 11 inches long to go around people's heads. And then I put them in about 1 inch in. All right? I used to use Velcro, now I use elastic. I just think it's more comfortable. But how you strap it is up to you. You have to find a way to make it fit on someone's head. It could be a sock mask, it could be whatever. But at this point is when you kind of want to strap it. All right, so that is that. Then you're going to paint it. This is a werewolf mask that I have painted. This was a blank. I base it in black. I dry brush it. This is not a painting tutorial. I'm explaining to you the whole process. And you have to use a paint that stretches and that flexes. If you paint it with acrylic, see how that even shows the latex through? But it doesn't flake off. It doesn't break off. Because this latex, this paint has a lot of stretch in it. This paint is 1/3 casting latex, the same stuff we poured the mask up with, 1/3 distilled water, and 1/3 latex house paint from Home Depot. I'm not kidding. Get indoor paint, and indoor flat is what I get. So that's the paint recipe. 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. That is what this was painted with. That's the easy way. Are there nuances? Can you go in with alcohol inks afterwards? Yes, you can. But let's get through the whole process today. Now, this doesn't look much like a werewolf or a wolf man because there's no hair on it. But I haven't worried about hair this whole process. You might have something that gets horns and then gets hair and whatnot. And you might want to do that after instead of how funny would this mold look and how heavy would it be if I molded giant horns on this. I like to put them on after. That's just me. This mask is from a company called Zagone Studios. And this is a man-wolf mask. And here you can see that they have put hair on it. And now that looks a lot more like a werewolf. You know, that is a means to an end. Now these guys, they use the fur as the strap. This is the strap. So that pattern is the right size for someone to put this on and it holds on to your head. All right? So that's how these guys do it. But that is part of finishing your mask. You can go as simple as maybe it's a zombie and it gets nothing and your mask is done. Maybe it's a skull and you wear it with a hood, that's fine. Maybe You want to go a little bit fancier. This is a mask. This is a latex mask with a fur cowl hood on it attached to it. It has an acrylic eye in it. It has, I didn't even cast the ears on this. These ears are EVA foam. The horns are EVA foam, and they're added on with contact cement. But you can make some killer stuff this way. It's all part of the process, but that's the whole process. The whole process of making a latex half mask I have just explained in this one video in 20 minutes. Go make stuff.
Oh, excuse me, terrible.